Hello and welcome back to the County Chat channel. We are today going to be previewing the 6th place finishing, the affectionately known Pears, or known as the Pears, the constituents of New Road and its scenic view of Worcester Cathedral. It is of course Worcestershire Cricket Club. I feel like Worcestershire Cricket Club is a county kind of often like punches above their weight. It's a kind of a classic underdog almost. They've been in Division 2, Division 1 now for the last 3 years, and I just sort of I like Worcestershire a lot. They're a kind of an easy side to cheer for in many ways. So a kind of a positive spin to begin this thing, and the fact that this has helped really in many ways because they're captained by a player whose surname holds plenty of weight in the Worcestershire ground. It is Brett D'Oliveira. He's the third generation of D'Oliveira to play for Worcestershire, which I just think is a wonderful, quirk of county cricket, and the fact that I guess that can happen. I guess it can happen in any sport, but I think that the fact they all play for the same county, I think is quite unique and quite beautiful in that way. And yeah, as it says on the sort of ESPN Cricket Info, and I guess it's the same for a lot of sort of sons of players of club cricket, is that he kind of grew up around the ground. He was going to training, he was going to watch all the matches, and he kind of grew up at New Road. And I think that's just something really beautiful to the fact that he's now the captain now and kind of continuing the traditions of Worcestershire and probably all the ways they look at the county and all the parts of it. And I just think, yeah, it's just a really nice thing. So anyway, that's just a little sidebar on Worcestershire being a nice thing, but also just sort of going into their leadership group. So yeah, the head coach again in 2025 will be Alan Richardson. He's been the club's coach since 2022, or head coach since 2022, and he was the coach in charge when they got promoted to Division 1 in 2023. So yeah, they've got plenty of kind of good vibes around the camp, and have got a good leadership group, very settled. And Brett D'Oliveira is a very much one of the most I don't know how long he's been the captain for, but it's been a good chunk of time now, and he's captained the white ball side before that. Anyway, on to sort of what will be their sort of weakness, maybe their main weakness going into 2025. I say going into at this point, obviously there's a few games gone by. As I've said before, I'm trying to keep it kind of as much of my own view of these players, and maybe not being swayed by early season form and all of this sort of stuff. So anyway, going into the sort of what's going to be the weakness, as I've done these previews, I've kind of continued with the logic that there's a really simple thing when you're going to worry about players. It's kind of like, if a team had players leave who took a lot of wickets or scored a lot of runs and maybe didn't replace them in any kind of way, is a real worry, obviously. And then maybe, and the other thing which I've noticed is a bit of a red flag for teams, I think, is the teams that just, again, not they might have low batting averages or high bowling averages. Kind of not a statistical analysis you're going to get any kind of university degree around, but just kind of a simple, markers of success or weakness for a team. And Worcestershire, unfortunately, have very much one of the two. I mean, especially, I'd say their batting averages are not particularly high, but the bowling averages were noticeably higher than most teams in the county, and especially most teams that finished around them. Because 6th, they had quite a lot of teams finished below them, Worcestershire, but I think the kind of peripheral stats maybe are looking worrisome for them, and especially in the bowling department, if you were asking me. I wrote this script quite a while ago, so I said in the first 2 rounds, Worcestershire's bowling looked toothless, and I must admit, I fear that trend might continue. So that will be the weakness we focus on. Actually, since I wrote this script, Worcestershire actually have been involved in some very low-scoring affairs in which their bowling has been a big part of them being in games, but they did lose those games, and in both against Durham and Essex, I think it was. And I think in many ways it's because they were on really helpful pitches for bowlers, and seam bowling particularly, and they didn't skittle the opposition, and I think the batting also didn't hold up. Anyway, getting into the bowling and why I think it might be the weakness for 2025. It's basically, to continue on that sort of players who leave, who take a lot of wickets. It's first to address the retirement of Joe Leach, a club stalwart who's represented Worcestershire and been synonymous with the club for the past decade, and probably even more. I actually don't know when he debuted, but he took 477 wickets and scored over 4,000 runs. So I think, his absence will be a really telling in the Worcestershire side. I think, not only wickets, I think anyone who leaves in these kind of situations and often retires, it's not only their wickets they take, but it's the kind of leadership, the talismanic nature of the figure. It could be their leadership. Joe Leach, an example of this, as being like a real leader of the bowling attack and leader of the fast bowling attack, always taking the new ball. And I think it's someone who sets the tone. So it might not even be that especially nearing the end of his career, his numbers were particularly outrageous and he was doing particularly amazingly. It was more that the fact that every day he's going to turn up, he's going to take the new ball, and he's going to be on the money. So I think there's just no clear replacement. I think there's no clear bowler who's going to be taking that mantle on. And, they're overseas, and Jacob Duffy, who I'll get onto later, I think is probably been the person who has. But I think, again, that overseas signings are never really, they're not permanent, and they're not, necessarily always this golden bullet. So I think they're going to miss Joe Leach a lot. And I think it's more the fact that, Joe Leach is just a real great character for this Worcestershire team and has been a real part of their success in recent years. One signing is Ben Allison, who's come in. So he was a loan signing from last year, played a few games off playing for Essex, and he'd consistently kind of not got into the Essex side, and we've not done the preview for Essex yet, but I think it's an obvious one because Essex have had two of the best fast bowling bowlers in England for the last probably 5 to 6 to 7 years now. So he's been in and around that team, but often going on lails and stuff, and I think he has now got this permanent move, and I think he'll be they'll really hope he can perform to a really high standard, and I think he's something you can really do. He's a tall seamer, he's very skillful, and again he would have been learning off Jamie Porter and Sam Cooke over the last 5 years, which is no bad thing. He hasn't started the season particularly spectacularly, but he has been fairly regularly available and played in every game, so I think he'll be looking to maybe kick on further into the middle and to the end of this season. Another seam bowler who I think, again, it's just a case of he's a good player, but I just don't know if he's good enough to really carry this lineup, is Tom Taylor. He's a bit of a journeyman of Midland counties. But in recent years he's found a real home at Worcester. His last year was a real breakout year. It was 27 wickets at an average of 21. So again, I think those two bowlers are kind of the ones I could have highlighted or signposted as maybe the sort of new leaders of the attack, and I think it's something that's underrated. I don't think it's talked about a lot in cricket as much as maybe it should do, but having played in cricket teams, having a bowler or a batter, as it be at the top of the order, who's very consistent and always delivers, or not always delivers because that's not the nature of cricket, but almost always delivers, it's just a really, really comforting thing in many ways. So it'll be interesting to see, if Tom Taylor over a longer season could be a part of that reason. He only played 6 matches last year, taking those 27 wickets. So there's a really good return on strike rates and all of that. But obviously that would make your average maybe look a bit better than it would over a full season. So the Matthew Waite looked really, really good this year. He's sort of a bowler who I think I maybe would have underestimated. He's a bit of a bowling all-rounder, but his bowling this season, I don't know, I couldn't tell you the wickets, but his bowling this season has really impressed. So I think he's someone who could jump into that, and he has really led the attack and been a big part of them being able to bowl teams out to start this season. He bowls very economically and very consistently, and his skills, I think, to just take that wicket, take that edge, have upped a bit. So I think if Matthew Waite can continue this for a whole season, Worcestershire will be looking to be in a good position. Another all-rounder that they have, who is definitely, I would have seen as more of a bowling all-rounder, but I think he's kind of emerged as more of a batting all-rounder this season, is Ethan Brooks. Again, he's a very valuable player to have as an all-rounder, but I think he's more of an economical bowler. I think he's a bit more maybe what I expected Matthew Waite to be at the start of this season, and he's not bowling as much as maybe he has done in previous years. But their sort of bowling averages both hover just over 30, or just in and around 30. I would assume Matthew Waite's has probably dropped in the last few weeks because he has had some really good bowling efforts. So I just think it's a case of these bowling all-rounders in general might not be enough to really push on and be making Worcestershire a really, really competitive team this year. Two 24-year-olds in Adam Finch and Ben Gibbon will look to be taking big strides. They both have career bowling averages nearing 40. I think they're both in the 38s or 39s. So again, it's just as simple as that is not good enough to really make your way in a Division 1 side, and if you want to gonna sort of emerge as a player who's going to be a big time performer, I think you need a bowling average much nearer 30 or even below it. So again, those players, Gibbon and Finch, will be looking for that, and obviously the coaches will hope maybe one of them at least will be able to sort of sneak in and really have a talented upswing. But they haven't done much in 2025 so far, so I think it would be surprising. Other two young bowlers I've noticed here is Jack Home and Harry Darley. They both have played a lot of white ball cricket in the sort of 100 affected one-day cup, but Jack Home is particularly a real prospect, and I think they'll really hope he can be a bit of a stalwart for years to come, and hope maybe, you know, if a Division 1 relegation does occur, that he can, players like him and some of these younger bowlers may be able to get a little bit more time just to play, because it's just, you know, when you're in Division 1 and maybe a team that could be struggling to stay in it, you're trying to win now and do everything you can to sort of stay in the division, really. So anyway, for the first 2 months of the season, as I sort of mentioned, Jacob Duffy will be in and around the team. He's an incredibly talented bowler he's represented New Zealand. You know, he I think is the kind of experience and leadership that will be really important in the post-Leach era, as I put it here. But though, to be on the negative side of it, you know, he is a bowler whose age is north of 30 and his bowling average is north of 30. It's not to say, again, he's not going to be a good signing, and he took 5 wickets in that game against Essex and has been looking really good. But again, if you looked at the pitch that he was bowling on at Essex, it's no surprise perhaps that a premier fast bowler who's played for New Zealand took some wickets on that pitch, and he did very well. But I think it's a case of, they're all talented players, you know, they're all professional cricketers, you know, they're all far better than I am, to make the obvious point. But it's just a case of, I just don't know if they've got quite enough to tackle what are the elite batting units of Division 1 and the elite batting units of England, I guess you'd say at that point. I don't think he's a bad signing. Like, I think he's a good player for them to get in, especially for the first 2 months. Again, he will have to leave at some point at those 2 months unless they extend his sort of time at the club, but I think it's unlikely, and I think it's going to be a case of, well, where's the leadership coming from after that? And again, I don't know, maybe there's some younger bowlers who kind of come across as a bit more leaders than perhaps you would suggest or you would think maybe, but I think it's just that sort of maybe symbolic leadership he'll be losing. Excuse me. For spin bowling, Worcestershire have recently been backing sort of the rarely seen sort of thing in cricket. It's the left arm leg spinner. Tom Hinley, who's somewhere around Sussex actually, but he's got the nod in the first few games over the signing from Notts in Fateh Singh. They're both very young and inexperienced, and Worcester can hope they can kind of get some, you know, good performances out of them. Tom Hinley's been important, and you know, he's was a big part with the bat actually of saving a draw at Taunton in the game where their bowling looked particularly toothless, as I used earlier. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if either of those can kind of, you know, have a strong season, take 20 to 25 wickets for the pairs. But I don't know. I'm not to say I question them. I think they're both. I mean, I'm sure they're both talented. I've seen a little bit more of Hinley than I have Singh, but it'll be interesting to see how they go in 2025. I just think it's always difficult for young spinners in a bowling unit that might be struggling anyway. I think you'd often don't get overs where you're looking at as an attacking option. You're more looking at, like, can this bowler survive and get through and get some overs done. As I've mentioned, you know, the aforementioned Brett D'Oliveira bowls some, you know, he's a very proven spinner, if you will. He's bowled leg spin for years and years for Worcestershire and bowled many and over, I'm sure. Though last year he didn't bowl himself very much, so whether or not he's looking for that case to be the same in 2025 and not bowl a lot, and I think he bowls mostly, it seems, when the team perhaps have got away from them a little bit and they're just looking for someone to get through some overs quickly. But you know, he's a talented spinner. He doesn't spin a leg spinner very far. He's got good variations of pace and sort of seam angle. But I think it'll be interesting to see how, you know, I just don't think the spinning unit is going to be adding much, I guess, is basically the simple way of putting it. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they go. So that's the bowling unit sort of previews. And again, I guess I'm not much sunshine and roses here. And I'd say, you know, for Worcestershire's batting, it's not as much of a weakness, but I must admit, I'm not going to sit here and say I think Worcestershire's batting unit is looking brilliant. You know, it's definitely more settled than the bowling unit, but it's still, you know, there's plenty of question marks in my opinion. You know, Worcestershire in 2024 didn't have a batter who had a season runs of over 800. I mean, usually if I looked at sort of a team's stats and saw that, I'd be saying it was a weakness. I just think I'd be saying, yeah, that's the thing that's going to look bad in the season coming up. I think it's just a case of, I think there's just plenty of batters I believe have the ability to get over that 800 run mark. I think it's just a case of if they will. I mean, again, I think this is, you know, you can probably tell there's a bit of an indictment on if I think, you know, if I think, you know, Worcestershire are going to stay up in Division 1. I think you can probably tell where that's going, but I would say the fact that I'm not saying that's a weakness is probably a good sign that I'm not seeing them in a particularly good light, if you will. The openers in Libby and Roderick were the second and third highest run scorers for the club with 710 runs and 695 runs respectively, and their averages are very solid, sort of always around that mid-30s range. And again, I think it's good enough to be sort of a strength within their batting lineup. But I think if you looked at those openers compared to some of the opening pairs of teams around them, or teams around them recently, so Ben Slater and Hasim Hamid at Nottinghamshire, or Rob Yates and Alex Davies at Warwickshire, just to use some sort of Midland counties as an example, they've just been nowhere near. I don't think they're on the same level of talent, if you asked me. So I think it's just a case of hoping one of them maybe can go big in 2025. I mean, the early season form is not suggesting that, so it will be interesting. So yeah, again, I would say, but yeah, they kind of, to use my phrase of question marks a lot, I've written here, I don't think they're question marks. I'd say them, but they're more as full stops. You don't think they're going to go on score 1,200 run season, but I don't think they're ever going to drop much below a 600 run season, if that makes sense. They're a bit more like your solid run scorers at the top of the order, but they might not be, big run scorers, say. The pair's number 3, or has been recently, is Kashif Ali. He had a breakout year last year. I think you'd be safe to say he led the club with runs with 767 at an average of 43. I think he's someone they'll probably look at and they'll say you need to repeat that or even do it even better. I think he's a really talented player, and I think he's just really important for their batting unit just in general. Really, I think they need him to be a particular strength for them, and I don't think he is, to be honest. But I think I don't think he's had a particularly great start to his 2025. I think he's it's not. Sorry, I feel like there was a harsh way of putting it. I don't think he's a particular strength, but I think he's he's not quite there yet. I think he's not quite good enough to really be a team that, a player who can carry a lineup, say, I guess is more the thing. At number 4, there's been a bit of a reshuffle in the early stages of 2025. Rob Jones had a really tough 2024. And to start the season, he was replaced at 4 by Ethan Brooks, who, again, I thought would be batting further down and maybe bowling more overs. But I think it seems that Worcester quite like the idea of maybe having a bit more of an all-rounder heavy lineup. Having said that, of recent games Rob Jones has played, though Rob Jones has perhaps continued his form, I don't think I've seen him have a score not in single digits so far. Again, it's been on very tough wickets where no one's been scoring many. I think against Durham in the game that just finished, no one scored a 50 in either innings, and 34 wickets fell, and it was a low scoring affair, and he's played in that game and the game at Essex before that, so it's not been a particularly easy way into the team. But yeah, Rob Jones has maybe proven what Worcestershire thought maybe before the season, that he's just not quite to the standard of Division 1. Ethan Brooks has played some good innings so far this season, but they have moved him down a little bit whilst Rob Jones has been back in, but whether or not he'll sort of stick around that 4. Yeah, and I was saying about Worcester, I think it's quite similar to what I talked about Leicestershire in the County Championship previews for Division 2, was that they have quite a strong, heavy bowling all-rounder focused lineup, which can be a really good thing. And yeah, Ethan Brooks was a bit of a standout last year. Or not standout, a standout year for him, I guess you'd say. He averaged over 30 and scored his first 100. I think Worcestershire clearly see his ceiling as a bit higher than a batter who bats 7 or 8, which was kind of what he was beforehand, and now he's broken into that top 4. So whether or not that's kind of a thing that's going to stick around, perhaps. Anyway, to follow on him in the lineup, or someone who's been consistent in this lineup, is another a red ball performer who's not performed particularly high. Adam Hose had quite a peculiar career, really, I guess. He's got a red ball average of barely over 25. He's 32 years old and has an incredibly successful white ball career. What I think is peculiar is the fact that Adam Hose, despite having this brilliant white ball success, and I'm sure he's played in the Big Bash, he's played in lots of white ball competitions around the world even, is that he still plays red ball. He still plays plenty of red ball. He played the whole season last year, and he played a lot. That is playing a lot this season so far. I really like it. It makes me quite happy. He's a really talented player in his early 30s that probably could have opportunities to go abroad and just look, county championship cricket's not worked for me and I'll just leave it behind him. but he hasn't, and I think, all praise to him. And another reason why I like Worcestershire in some ways, I guess, is just that kind of thing. It's maybe for the love of the county, for the love of the for the love of the game. Playing 4-day cricket is a really unique thing, and I think people look at it as like it is a bit of a privilege. So yeah, his career, his season last year was hilariously consistent with his career in the sense of he scored 526 runs at an average of 25.04, which was 0.02 away from his career average. Again, just a sort of thing that I enjoyed seeing, how similar he played to his career average. As I've said in many videos before, a specialist batter whose average is anywhere near south of 30, let alone a good 5 runs south of 30, there's bowling all-rounders who have higher batting averages than Adam Hose, and especially for someone who's over the age of 30, I wouldn't say much positive about it, if we're honest. Again, it could just be the sort of cricket romantic in me talking, but I have a nice positive feeling about Adam Hose. He's not in 2025. He's not had a particularly great start to the season. He's scored runs in one game, I think. And there's, little to no supporting evidence in his Red Bull career that would suggest he's going to have a big year in 2025. Again, it could just be the little, romance in me, and I really want him to do well because he's not kind of turned his back on Red Bull cricket, and I think it would be really nice. Kind of similar to Tom Banton in some ways for Somerset, who I'm sure we'll talk about when we get to him. I'll get to Somerset even. But yeah, I just think it's the fact that he hasn't gone, he's not gone around the world, and he's not just given up on it. And I think, there's something to be said for the T20 cricket helping people in their Red Bull game, because you go around the world, you meet people, you upskill, you learn different techniques, or maybe not techniques, but you learn different mindsets. And I think that can really help. So hopefully, and maybe, the pairs will see the fruits of that labour, if you enjoy that pun, and that he, will basically have a really big season in 2025. I hope he does. All power to him. Captain D'Oliveira will bat around that middle order, and he's almost always in and around that sort of low to mid 30s range and scores a good few runs. And again, he's one of those players, I think, I said something similar about Tom Alsop for Sussex. He doesn't have a high average, but I think he often plays those really hard and long innings, which are just, often not talked about, but I think it's really important. I think, people who can play the sort of 70 not out off 200 balls when you're playing for a draw. And I think players like that are really valuable, and often, the numbers might not show up with it, if that makes sense. But yeah, against Somerset, and speaking of that game, he scored 121 off 340 balls, and before getting out, and Matthew Waite has played a brilliant innings alongside him, but he got out to also by one of the worst LBW decisions I've maybe ever seen, to Archie Vaughan. He left one about 6th stump, the ball had barely spun, and because he left it, the umpire just gave him out because it hits bad. It was infuriating to watch, but anyway, he was massively important in Worcestershire, batting 200 overs for that draw. I think he's an ever-present force, and I think whether it be bat or ball, I'm a big fan of his. I think he's a cricketer. He's in the contest, and he's really important to Worcestershire's chance of survival, I think, for 2025, alongside of obviously his leadership capabilities. But I think it's just a case of being, a big name and a sort of talisman for that team, and especially, again, as I say, with the loss of Joe Leach. As I mentioned, sort of around the sort of all-rounders, there are quite a few who kind of finish around that. Matthew Waite, as I just mentioned, he had a really productive year with the bat in 2024. He averaged 33, scoring 433 runs. In that same innings as D'Oliveira so far this year, he scored 87 not out off 319 balls, which is just a brilliant, show of will and determination to stay in that game. I mean, it was a flat pitch, don't get me wrong, but by day 4 it was spinning, and he did incredibly well. I think this shows his talents with the bat, but I guess it also shows the concentration to be able to score runs over a long period of time, which I think is often the thing that limits bowlers. I think a lot of bowlers have talent to score runs, they play the good shots, but I think it's just having that will and determination to really just lock in and go deep in an innings, which shows maybe that will be a good sign for his whole 2025. So I think, if you were to bet on the over, if you will, on how many runs he scored last year with 433, I'd be going all in on it, because I think he's shown all the capabilities to have a 500, 600 run season, perhaps in that lower order, which I think has become even more important in modern cricket. So bowlers, Allison and Taylor can certainly wield the willow with aplomb, as I've written here, and they are really, I think they're two players who can definitely, as bowlers, score some handy runs and score some 50s. I think they average both sort of just shy of 20, which again for bowlers is a very, very respectable mark. So those two kind of look out for some lower innings runs maybe. Anyway, overall, I fear for Worcestershire, to be honest. I think that's probably been a clear tone throughout this in 2025. I think relegation, I'd say, looks like a real possibility. I mean, I personally think maybe if there were any team I would put money on to go down, and not that I'm a betting man, I would probably say it's Worcestershire. And again, as I said at the top of this episode, I really hope it isn't. I really love Worcestershire. I kind of enjoy sort of cheering for them as a second team somewhat. But I just think, the bowling will, the limitations of the bowling will kind of put strain on that batting unit, and I just don't think the batting unit has enough to sort of stick with it. I think like Warwickshire, for example, last year didn't take as many wickets as they probably hoped to, but I think their batting unit was always strong enough to keep them in games, and I think that'd be the same for them this year. Whereas I think Worcestershire have a similar struggle with bowling, perhaps even more of a struggle with bowling, and they just don't have the batting unit to kind of be, their bowling unit, the batting unit isn't strong enough to kind of make up for the bowling, I guess is the simple way of putting it. I just think simply, I think as a total all-round package, I just don't see that bowling unit as a first division caliber bowling unit. And now, as I've written here, obviously perhaps easily said when you nearly concede 700 runs in the first bowling innings you have of the season, but I think that not necessarily shows it because it was a flat pitch, and Tom Banton scored an all-timer innings for Somerset, but I think it's been the game since also as well. I just think it's shown that there've been some limitations there. Again, some great bowlers in those teams. I'm not saying there isn't, but it's just a case of, I think there just isn't that upside. I just don't see them having a bowler kind of coming out from the bushes, if you will, to have a really good season and take lots of wickets. I think their performance at Taunton with the bat kind of shows how competitive side who were well run and well led. I think it's just a case of I just don't think the talent level is there, unfortunately, to consistently win games in Division 1. Again, they'll kind of hope for a similar season to Warwickshire because the point system is still totally mental, points for a draw. So you could, in Worcestershire might hope that they can have a real, sort of renaissance with the bat and score some big innings and maybe get some draws. But as I said, I've got Worcestershire. I kind of hope I'm wrong. I just think there's a lot of things stacked against them for 2025, and the early season form has only suggested one way that it won't be going. They're yet to play at home, and I said here, maybe the magic of New Road will unlock another level for this team, but the cold hard numbers would not suggest so. I guess it's a kind of a nice finishing way to put it, but I just think, maybe New Road can bring something out of them, being used to the conditions and some sort of nice being at home thing. But I just think, personally, 4-day games of cricket, the better team usually wins. Obvious point, usually the case in any sport, but I think you can't just go off vibes, perhaps. Anyway, a little sort of lineup, or not again at this point. At the start of the season, it was predicted lineups. Now it's a bit more just like this is kind of how they're looking. Martin Roderick and Libby at top, who are Roderick's the keeper, and then you've got Kashivali, Ethan Brooks, Adam Hose, Brett De Oliveira, Matthew Waite, Ben Allison, Tom Taylor, Tom Hinley, and Adam Finch. Again, the bowlers will come and go because you always have to rest your bowlers, and I think Rob Jones will make his way into that batting lineup a bit as they clearly back his abilities. But I think Worcestershire, that will be their sort of most consistent lineup, shall we say, for 2025. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and listening all the way to this point. If you have, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out and helps show that people are interested in this sort of stuff. There should be some more videos sort of clicking around here around my face at this point. So anyway, thank you very much for watching and listening, and that is all from the County Chat.